Hello, everyone. I'm very excited today to present you to a new guest of my mini series around the importance of standard of care of making clinical trials more efficient. I met Kasia Harris a few years ago, to be honest, when we were just starting to work on Trial Hub, our data intelligence platform for feasibility. And Kasia was one of the people that really stood out with her experience in feasibility, in planning clinical trials. Back then, she was part of a CRO. Then she moved to a big pharma company. So she has an incredible experience in what it's like to plan clinical trials on all sides and understanding all sorts of stakeholders, very forward thinking type of mindset as well. And that's why it was so natural when I started these mini series on standard of care and the importance of understanding the local standard of care to actually reach out to Kasia and invite her in a coffee type of conversation. I do have a coffee. You don't see me, but I do have a coffee here. And ask about her opinion. Kasia, welcome. And yeah, please let me know a little bit, let us know a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Maya. Hi, everyone. Kasia Harris. So what about myself? You already said that I am long time in the space. It will be 14 years doing feasibility, but as well a long time in a clinical trial space. I am privileged to know both sides, both CRO and Pharma. So let's start and discuss standard of care.
And I actually want to first explain why you said privilege, because we had this conversation recently. Why like people that have spent time both on doing feasibility in CRO and doing feasibility in a pharma company are privileged because there are differences in the way companies are doing feasibilities, and there are pluses and minuses, but actually experiencing both gets you the pluses of having the volume, many clinical trials while you're on the CRO, to see all sorts of protocols, all sorts of indications even, and try to find the best way to, like, the best workarounds and make sure that these protocols are actually feasible and provide your expertise. On the other side, when you're the pharma, when you're looking at your baby, literally your clinical trial is your baby, to make sure that you go the extra mile when you're doing the feasibility assessment of making sure that the company is the best position to conduct the clinical trial in the most efficient way. So that's why you're privileged, and that's why also your opinion has always mattered to me a lot. So that's why, Kasia, before we dive into standard of care, I want to hear your opinion. How do you understand feasibility, like running feasibility for clinical trials today?
Yeah, so you mentioned, because about saying privilege, but as well the question is how we understand feasibility. And that's differ as well, being at CRO space and being at the sponsor side. So you can look at feasibility as a three way of looking at the data. Is a protocol feasibility, country feasibility, and site feasibility. So be involved very early in designing protocol, looking how where the protocol can be executed, but as well where will be fit in a standard of care, which we're talking about. And then is a country feasibility. Is this protocol feasible in every country? And we're going back again, how the patient's going through the healthcare system. And how much this protocol can be executed there. For example, is the drug that patient required to be on trial entering our protocol is reimbursed in the country? So there will be patient pool that we can that will be feasibility for those patients to be enter in our protocol. And there is a site feasibility where we're selecting specific sites, and sometimes depends on the country healthcare system. The sites or the doctor decides about how the patient is treated. They have this preferred treatment pattern. Other healthcare systems are very strict what is reimbursed when the patient is starting to have disease, is diagnosed with the disease, and then following second or third line. And is a site specific, then we call it standard at the site level standard of care, that we can see if the majority of sites or majority of doctor prefer the using specific therapy, and how does it impacting number of sites we can select in a country.
You partially answered my next question, but once again, what is the role of standard of care, like understanding the local standard of care when you're doing feasibility? You actually were quite correct to mention that feasibility has a couple of categories of feasibility: protocol, country, site feasibility. I would add patient feasibility, but maybe patient feasibility is, let's say, divided into the previous three categories. So what is the role of standard of care in when you run feasibility? And I would add to this question, is there a difference between different therapeutic areas where standard of care plays a bigger role and in others not that big of a role? I mean, from your experience.
So it's extremely important to know the standard of care in each country. Yes, I call it patient pathway. We discussed this. It's not the patient journey. I will distinguish between patient journey, where it's more like from the patient perspective. For me, patient pathway standard of care is how the patient, once is having symptoms of something and going in through the healthcare system, and what type of drugs, procedures are available for the patient depends on the stage of the disease. So when, for example, if someone sees something happening on the skin, can a patient go straight away to dermatologist, or must go to the family doctor to be referred to the dermatologist? And it will depend on the country. And then what drugs are straight away reimbursed for as a first line of therapy, or need to pay more, or are there other type of procedures that as well the patient must
Like
have
options.
before, before the specific drug will be available to be prescribed for the patient.
Yeah. Sometimes, now that you mentioned the patient pathway, I'm thinking about like some rare diseases. In some countries, you may have only one hospital that gives you the final document for having this disease, for example. So knowing even this thing can actually make a huge difference in the way you select the country, select the sites after that. Like that will define whether you would have a referral site, because if that's the only hospital giving you this document, you know this is the place that all patients go through. And
And is another thing is, for example, in oncology, yes, chemotherapy must be prescribed by oncologists, but not in Germany, for example. So is as well depends on which specialization will be able to prescribe medication, what is reimbursed. So knowledge of standard of care is a basic, really, because sometimes when we have a protocol and the sponsor thinks, yes, we can go everywhere, we can find out through standard of care that there is limitation of number of countries we can go, because there is not reimbursed or is not available. Very often approval of the drug follow very quickly in Western European countries with reimbursement, where in Eastern European countries there is a lack, and sometimes we're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 years that
Yeah.
this drug will be not reimbursed. So if we're planning the protocol that we're thinking, okay, the patient must be treated in the first line with specific mechanism of action that is new, our
Mm.
number of countries available is limited. So then the next question is, okay, so how long is going to take us to recruit this patient, especially in the Western European countries where you have a more availability of a new medications and new mechanism of actions. What does it mean for our protocol and time when we will be able to enroll patients?
Mm. Do you think it's in somehow, like in any way, if the availability of more treatments, does it impact at the end of the day the motivation of patients to join clinical trials? That's something I'm discussing with patients, but I want to hear your opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And especially we're still using placebo in different,
Mm.
in oncology, we don't using placebo for many, many years. But
Mm.
outside oncology, the placebo is still used. So my recent experience is that the regulatory coming back saying, well, you cannot use only your drug with placebo. You must as well add standard of care, and regulatory recently looking very closely how long the patient will be on placebo and demanding switching to standard of care uh,
Mm.
after specific number of weeks for patient on placebo.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
No, I was going to go one step back because you mentioned that when assessing the local standard of care, that gives you an idea of whether you're gonna find like the eligible patients. Sometimes it just reminded me of a case that we recently had where um I don't remember the treatment. I was not involved in this project. I just heard about this, and basically it was that the treatment was already reimbursed in the States 2 years ago. Basically, yes, I remember now. The inclusion criteria was such that it required patients to be on a treatment at least 1 or 2 years before they start the clinical trial. That was a part of the eligibility criteria.
Mhm.
And in the States, that was possible because their drug was reimbursed 2 years ago. So there were patients that are at least 1 year on this drug already. And there was a pool of patients. But that wasn't the case in Europe, where the majority of countries reimburse that a year later. So you would be able to find these patients, but maybe a year later, because the patients that are currently out there were now on this treatment and they didn't have this 1 year in treatment. So even tiny details like this one can actually make a huge impact on the feasibility. It's just a story that I remember. Speaking of that, basically, Kasia, what are the implications of not understanding the local standard of care when before starting your clinical trial? What are these implications from your experience?
So the implication is that you're starting the study and you're not enrolling, and you asking yourself, okay, what is the reason? And then you starting talking to the doctors, and they saying, well, I don't really like the drug that you require the patient be on, or oh, it's not reimbursed. So in fact, uh, I don't have this patient population, which is interesting from the perspective we in feasibility, we're doing site feasibility, we're sending sites protocol.
Mm.
We asking them, are you able to enroll patients? And they say, of course, 10 patients in a month.
In three
Uh,
seconds.
yes, I will enroll. And then it's natural. People sometimes do not paying attention. Doctors are very busy. So it's
Yeah.
our responsibility as feasibility to make sure we understand, and we helping the sites to make sure they understand these
Mm,
nuances about the protocol
got it.
because they're not paying attention because they're busy.
Mm,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So what you're saying is that, of course, we always need to do site feasibility. Like the sites are essential as much as the patients at the end of the day. Otherwise, you can't run a clinical trial. Um, but when you do a site feasibility, let's say the exercise with the questionnaires, that's what we're discussing now. It's essential to be prepared how to prepare the questionnaire so that you guide them on these nuances of the clinical trial that may break the clinical trial, may be a bottleneck of the clinical trial. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're trying to do before starting the site feasibility?
Yes. So you want to look at the country feasibility. So you want, like,
Mm,
is a protocol? Yes. Is my protocol uh, is my inclusion criteria or inclusion
yeah.
criteria limiting my patient pool? Because
Okay.
there could be procedures, there could be, like you're saying, the time of on specific drug, or,
Mm,
you know, the because the standard of care is not only the drugs, yes, how the patient is diagnosed. So the great example is a breast cancer, yes, and neoadjuvant treatment. Who diagnosed the patient, and if is a early stage of the disease, the patient can be sent straight away to surgeon. And
yeah.
when we want the study in neoadjuvant space, suddenly we're losing patients because they're already in a process
Yeah.
with surgeon, and suddenly instead of 10 patients, we ending up with one that was caught
Mm,
somewhere there. So,
yeah.
how long is in each stages, or you need, sometimes you have diseases that you can wait, like you can line up patients, and you're looking at your database and saying, okay, I will have 10 patients and I will wait for the study start. But very often when we're looking at the patient in progression, you don't have time. So you
Mm,
need to catch the patients in this
certainly.
stage. Yes. And of course, with right now with medical electronic records, you can as well line up the patients in a sense,
Mm,
because the patient is currently on the treatment, the patients will progress, and you
yeah.
can estimate somewhere there. But as well, you, like, the knowledge how the patient's going through the system. So if the disease is progressing, will the patient stay with the same specialty, or will move somewhere, or is coming to our site at this stage? So
Mm,
even is diagnosed with the disease for some times, maybe specialty changing as well,
yeah.
because this depends on healthcare system. So knowing standard of care per country is basics, is extremely important for timely execution of patient enrollment for the study.
Yeah. Kasia, um, you're currently based out of the States, like
Correct.
out of United States, but um, you're coming originally from Poland. And I wonder, is that the reason why you understand that there is a difference between the standard of cares of different countries? Because my observations are such that in many cases, speaking about electronic health records and the electronic medical records, like, yeah, to be more precise, a lot of the US colleagues I've been speaking to, because of the access to these electronic medical records, they do this protocol feasibility on top of these claims data, electronic medical records. And once they do the feasibility there, they usually assume, well, that's how patients are treated. But tell me from your perspective, how different it is, the standard of care in the different countries. Is it much different? Can you rely on electronic medical records that are in the States to tell you how a patient in Poland, for example, or a patient in Germany is actually being treated, their access to treatments, their access to procedures, and so on and so forth?
I wish. but
Yes.
Absolutely
So
not.
it's in our wish list.
No, absolutely not. The United States has a different healthcare system. You know, everything is based on
Yeah.
insurance. The doctors has a much more flexibility. So it's
Mm,
rather the what they want and what your specific what patient healthcare system will reimburse rather than standard. There is no, I call it no standard of care in United States,
mm,
where European countries are much more like, it's not much more. They are very strict what you can or what you cannot do. Uh, like I know in Spain, Italy, I did long time ago this survey asking for the what the sites prescribing, and you could see that in United States there was a many medication that investigators indicating they will prescribe. It was like my preference of treatment, when in Europe very strict, 80%,
mm,
90% follow what was the guidance from the
mm.
country, what they can prescribe. So coming from outside, I don't know if it's coming from outside, it's just asking questions. Is somewhere
Yeah.
there different? Yeah, yes, what is available, how the healthcare system works, um,
Mm,
where you going. Germany health. I used to live in Germany as well. The healthcare system is very different than any other country. So
yeah.
you like we must understand the healthcare system, and then a patient how is going, and as well we discussed this, a patient journey could be as well completely different
Yeah.
from everything what we understand from the data side.
Yeah. Speaking about the patient pathway, um, you mentioned Spain, you mentioned Italy. Like we were discussing in the past, a huge part of the patient pathway, obviously that's coming from the healthcare system,
Mhm.
but a huge portion of the patient pathway is actually defined by the reimbursement rules. So, and in many of these countries that you mentioned, Spain, Italy, you may have even regional reimbursement rules, which makes it even more complicated, which means that a site in Toscana may have one set of rules and another site in Rome, for example, may have another set of rules for how patients, what type of access. And sometimes the definitions are very specific, even how much you're reimbursing that. Is it 20%? Is it 80%? And it's how much also plays a role in the patient's mentality. How do they perceive access? Because access has to do with, can I afford it? Like literally, how much more money am I spending on other procedures and other like drugs at the same time? And with the new treatments being even more expensive, that is a huge motivator, or the other way around, for joining a clinical trial. But speaking about the fact that it's different, like each in these countries is different. You've planned, I don't know how many phase 3 clinical trials where you have to assess many countries. How do you do that today, Kasia? How do you assess the standard of care so that prior to the site feasibility, so that you're better prepared to actually
It's not like,
ask the
so
right questions?
for anyone who will listen, I, you didn't ask me, but I will just go to Trial Hub
Ah,
to look at the standard of care, because some companies have local affiliates that they will go and
mm,
check. So I will send requests. It's
yeah.
very popular in pharma. Even in CRO, we used to go to our local offices and ask,
Mm,
okay, can you tell me? But the question is how holistic it is. Because,
okay.
uh, if I'm asking someone, uh, can they really assess, or can they miss something? Who is checking them? We know we all make mistakes. So is this really validated what they providing? I need to trust it is, but I will need to go. It takes time. they will gather information. They will, come back to me. I will put everything in Excel, and it's not very efficient, I would say.
Okay.
And on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
if I ask today, how I know that tomorrow will not change? And typically, we're doing country assessment very early in the process, so that from the standard of care, how I make sure that there is no change that will impact my patient pool in
Mm,
6 months, when only US will be up and running quite fast. Any other countries will, where standard of care really matter, will follow 6 months later, 3 months later, 4 months later, 6 months later. So how can I be sure that something didn't change
mm,
and impact it? So I will need to redo that instead of just
mm.
going somewhere to the place and not bother people with
Yeah.
additional requests.
So if I understand correctly, doing the assessment once is not optimal. Like you do it once
No.
only because you don't have any other choice. But in the ideal scenario, you'll be able to check that regularly, even maybe throughout the clinical trial, because it's yeah. Actually, I have such a case some years ago where suddenly for just 3 months there was a negotiation between the company and the government, like French government, on whether they should reimburse fully or partially a drug. For these 3 months, the patients were without this option. And that was the best recruiting country, even though they had the highest competition in the past and they were betting on other countries back in the days, Ukraine, Russia, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. So even that little thing, even these exceptions, can actually influence the speed of your clinical trial. So I understand, like, I definitely understand. Um,
So
yeah,
Maya, one more, because we're talking about the standard of care, but there is another aspect that sometimes we need to know about the standard of care or drug availability because of the comparator we planning to include
yeah.
in our protocol.
And I guess the
And
budget as well, Kasia, right?
yeah,
It does
well,
impact the
but
budget,
that's
right?
yes, but as well that's regulatory. Yes, if we
Mm,
thinking about to have a comparator, the question is it available in a country, and
mm,
is it used in a country, and which stage? So if we're planning the protocol in second line of the disease, is this comparator approved in this country? Because as well there could be differences how the drug is used depends on the country. So one country can use the drug in first, second line, or third line. Another country, the drug can be not even approved in the indication. This is in immunology, yes, where the one drug is approved in different indication like psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, atopic dermatitis, etc., etc. It could be that at one country is not cover all diseases that in additional
yeah,
country will be. So if we
yeah.
coming as a comparator with this drug, can we use a country, which as well is extremely important to look at? So just an
Mm,
aspect as well of knowledge uh, about the specific drug and how it's used in a country. Is it reimbursed? Is approved, reimbursed, etc.,
mm,
etc.
yeah. Thank you for this clarification, Kasia. I have one last question because I know we are running out of time, but uh, what stops companies, and you've been on both sides, what stops
Mhm.
companies from assessing the standard of care regularly? Because you mentioned in the ideal scenario, you do it not just once, but throughout the whole, even clinical trial. What stops them from doing that?
You will need to
What's the
have a
reality?
process. No, you will need to
Mm,
have a process and people that doing this
yeah.
because it's at the country level. Yes, so you will need
Mm,
to have a process system, or if there is not system that it does it like in a auto like in an automated way.
automated way. Yeah.
Yes, so you will need to have every 6 months, or depends if, because standard of care can change monthly, 3 months, every like really, or every time the drug is reimbursed.
Yeah.
Depends on the country. So there will need to be someone that is sitting at the country level,
In charge
checking
of that.
and providing updates. So it's a lot of people, if done manually. So
Yeah. And what if you're not in this country? Like, for example, what happened with the war in Ukraine? Suddenly, Ukraine and Russia were out of, the, let's say, not considered. I mean, I'm not saying this is the right thing, especially with Ukraine, but I'm just saying that many companies are
yes,
no longer considering that as the country to go to and conduct
yes.
clinical trials. And suddenly, they started looking at new countries like Georgia and like Moldova and so on and so forth. But let's say you don't have a local office, so what do you do then?
Uh, like when you are in CRO, you're finding someone. When you are at the sponsor site, you're asking your CRO partner to check
Uh-huh.
for you.
Okay.
But
Okay.
no, absolutely, you are right. Then you need to trust. Like you will go and ask investigators during
The
site
investigators.
feasibility,
Yeah.
but you are already there. You're spending money to do
Hmm.
site feasibility, yes, instead of
Yeah.
knowing straight away Georgia is
Yeah.
out of the thinking because they don't have a drug. So
Yeah.
you need then to invest money. So it's not optimal.
Mm.
Like you're
Mm.
right that the process will only work if you have an affiliate or office or someone who can speak
Just
local
open your
language,
eyes.
know regulation,
Mm.
know the healthcare system. If not, is
Mm.
unfortunately you don't have country
Yeah.
intelligence. Mhm.
We'll do a webinar with my team to actually show how you can go around with like using different documents, exactly like local documents and
Mhm.
stuff like that to check. It is hard. I agree with you, Kasia. It is hard, but then the options are you either ignore this country that may actually be your recruitment champion, or you
Mhm.
spend this extra money with the belief that the site feasibility will just confirm what something that you believe, like something you assume. Anyway, Kasia, thank you so much for this conversation. I hope that I can reserve the spot for one more conversation because there are so many other areas of feasibility. I mean, today we focused more on standard of care, but I want to hear your opinion on the new ways of doing feasibility. I know you're also a big fan of the new technologies. You've built multiple platforms being part of different companies. So I'll reserve this spot for next time, Kasia.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. A pleasure talking to you always.
Same.